Well, between those, that was a fun game between the Miami Marlins and the Detroit Tigers. It was a death by a million cuts. And honestly, we're getting to the point where the Detroit Tigers just did enough to get us to training camp. But when you look at the Detroit Tigers, and a lot of people have asked, why are they selling off pieces? I put an athletic piece out there that from Cody Stavenhagen, and then named the players. And there was a lot of relieving pitchers like Jason Foley and Alex Lang on there. I don't think that those guys will be traded, but if you can get a lot for them, you're gonna make the deal. See, Detroit isn't in a situation where they could just say we're gonna keep this guy for the future. Because if you look at their future, it's primarily high school kids. It's primarily kids that are like 18 years old. They drafted Max Clark and 9 other high schoolers for a reason. Scott Harris inherited a mess. He inherited an absolute mess. And I know fans are going to say that the Detroit Tigers have been rebuilding for a long time, and you're completely correct. They have been rebuilding for a long time. I mean, they only have 5 90-win seasons since 1984. But when you look at what Al Avila did to this franchise, when you look at what Al Avila did to prohibit this franchise from actually being able to make significant progress into the future, look no further than the albatross contract of Javi Baez. Look no further. You know, Detroit sports has had some pretty bad general managers, but I am confident when I say this. Al Avila is one of the worst general managers in Detroit sports history. He beats out Matt Millen by a lot, and he's right up there with Bob Quinn. Because if you look at the reality, Al Avila, Bob Quinn, they both inherited a decent team. All they had to do was build some pieces around it. Al Avila ended up trading, Justin Verlander. He ended up trading JD Martinez because the team went down the pike and got nothing for him. The best player that they got out of all the trades that Al Avila made was Jake Rogers. And if you think that Jake Rogers is a prized player in a deal with Justin Verlander, giving him a Hall of Fame pitcher, you're absolutely insane. The same thing with Bob Quinn. But the thing about the Tigers is Scott Harris is going to have to play this like he's kind of proved that that's what he wants to do. A lot of people took umber with the way that he talked about on Bailey Sports about, he's not going to rush these prospects up like Colt Keith and Justin Henry and Malloy. And the reason for that is, look at what Colt Keith did in July at AAA. 217, 317 OBP just wasn't good enough. Scott Harris probably came into this organization and said, this is probably one of the worst situations you can come into. And not only that, I have a contract issue with Javi Baez. Now, you can get rid of Javi Baez and just send him a check and say, screw it, go on your way. But do I think that's possible? I think it's possible. I think anything's possible, especially with Scott Harris. And I think that Chris Ilitch does want to win, and I think he will spend the money to win. But ultimately, I'm glad that Chris Ilitch didn't give Al Avila a blank check to spend more money, because we would be even more in a hole. I mean, look at the Jonathan Schoop. Jonathan Schoop, we DFA'd him. Thank God that Eduardo Rodriguez contract is working out well, and it's going to get us some prospects hopefully pretty soon here by the trade deadline. It's just a rough spot for the Detroit Tigers. And everyone that loves the Detroit Tigers, you know what, you are totally right when you say, like, we've been rebuilding for a long time. Because you have. And it's just like the Red Wings, right? Ken Holland, for every gripe that people talk about Ken Holland, he was a good general manager up until the last part of his tenure. So when you look at Ken Holland's last part of his tenure, you go, okay, he won us a cup, put us in the playoffs many times to have a chance to win the cup. And that's what happens. With Al Avila, Scott Harris is coming in here, and he's not inheriting anything. At least Steve Eisenman, when he went to the Red Wings, he inherited a guy like Dylan Larkin. He inherited some decent players, not nothing to it's nothing like they have right now. But when you look at Scott Harris, he's got to rebuild his franchise from the top, from the bottom up to the top. It's going to take a little longer than I think people are expecting. And in the best case scenario, that Scott Harris makes some great free agent moves like he did with Zach McKinstry, makes those little brilliant moves because there's no salary cap in baseball. Potentially, you can be competing for the division next year. Potentially. Chicago looks like they're going through a fire sale. The Guardians and Twins, you never know what they're going to be. It's an open kind of spot. But to win a World Series, you're a couple years away. And I know people, they don't want to wait. But the reality of the situation is what we are in with the Detroit Tigers is a rebuild upon a rebuild. So we rebuilt the first time, and we built it like some crappy Yugo car. Now we're trying to rebuild it and make it a nice hot rod. Because, look, when you wear the Old English D, it's a very prestigious logo to wear. It's worn with pride. It's worn with honor because of the people that you came before you, like Al Kaline, like Ty Cobb, all the greats. So we need to get back to the old Detroit Tigers. Somewhere along the line since 84, 85, 86, they fell into a pattern of not developing their own players, not developing their own prospects. Look, 84, Lou and Tram both were developed by the Detroit Tigers. They came up through a system and they became a great 1-2 combo at second and short. Tigers have to get back to that. And that is Scott Harris's biggest thing that he has to get taken care of. All those years that the Detroit Tigers were competing for a World Series with Miguel and Justin and, eventually Max Scherzer, to me, it was just window dressing. I didn't think that they were ever going to win a World Series. I had hoped that they would win a World Series because I think that if you get to the World Series, you obviously have a shot. But when you look at the teams that they went against, the Cardinals, the Giants, two franchises that have had they've had this ability forever to find talent, rebuild pretty quickly, and then they win World Series. It sucks because if you're a Detroit Tigers fan, I was born in 1994, okay? So a majority of my life, Tigers have been bad. They just have. 94 to 2005, they were bad. You go 2006 to 2014, they had some really fun years. It was enjoyable to watch the Detroit Tigers. And since they traded Justin Verlander away, since they traded JD Martinez away, this team hasn't been the same. And they've been really bad. And it's been absolutely dreadful to watch. But it's time to rebuild this team the right way. Dave Dombrowski threw a lot of money at rebuilding this team. He threw money at Pudge to get him here, and that was huge in the rebuild for Dave Dombrowski. The problem was with Dave Dombrowski, they never really made that critical next step. Sometimes you see these teams that are just middling, and then they're trying to get these prospects up, and they never really hit on them. You see what the Tampa Bay Rays do. You see what the Dodgers do. I mean, the Dodgers, like, yeah, they do spend a lot of money, but they have an extremely good amount of good prospects. Same with the Yankees. It can be done. You have to build a good system, and you have to take advantage of the draft and the international pool. And El Avila was an international scout, and we see nothing from El Avila in terms of the international free agents that he brought in, and he was under Dombrowski. So look, it's going to be interesting to see what happens at the trade deadline, because this could be the key part, the most critical part of the Detroit Tigers rebuild. Instantaneously, this could change the forecast of the franchise. You make one good trade. You make one good trade. Just remember, the San Diego Padres traded who was it? I forget. It was they traded with the White Sox. It's God, it's gonna burn me up. Off the top of my head, I'm missing it. But in the trade with the pitcher that they traded, God, I can't believe I forgot his name. But in that deal, the Chicago White Sox sent a kid named Fernando Tatis to the San Diego Padres. Instantly, it made that team pretty damn good because, a couple years later, Fernando Tatis he arrived at the show, started making plays, started playing great, and he became one of the best players in baseball. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. That's probably the main course that Scott Harris is going to have to take. And that's going to be the critical part. You, as a general manager, when you're a rebuilding club, you have to sell your assets and you have to get something for them. The one thing that Steve Yzerman has done pretty well with the Detroit Red Wings is he sold assets that, like Philip Hronek, right? He got a first round pick from Philip Hronek. He traded he got, he took a bunch of spare parts and he got picks for them. But you can't trade picks in Major League Baseball, but you can get prospects. And you never know, unless your scouting staff tells you, what those prospects are going to potentially be. And if you strike gold with one, that could be an instant help to your team in the forecast moving forward. Obviously, you got the free agency. You're going to have free agency. You're going to have a chance to spend money because Miguel Cabrera's contract's coming off the books. Eduardo Rodriguez's contract's coming off the books. But again, you can't just throw money at the problem. The problem has always been with the Detroit Tigers the past, since 1984, their last World Series. They can't develop their own prospects. You look throughout baseball. Look at any team you want to. I mean, you could look at the Dodgers with Walker Buehler and Julio Reyes. Yes, they've made some trades, but that's because they have the prospects to make those trades. New York Yankees. Yes, they spent a lot of money, but they brought up Judge. They had some players that really benefit the rebuild, and they had the prospects to where they could make trades for Giancarlo Stanton. Very rarely does a team spend their money to win a World Series. So, look, when people were asking me why do we have to trade some of the players that are on the block? It's simple. You have to get prospects. You have to build this farm system up because it's nowhere close to being anywhere complete. And I know if Scott Harris could say it, he would. Like, he inherited a situation where there's very few prospects that are going to actually amount to a major league roster. And that's part of the problem. So we will talk to you in the next video of Between the Whistles Detroit, and we will see you in the next video.